Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us for today's event. The Power of Partnership, the UAE and the Carter Center celebrate 30 years of partnership. My name is Simon Bland. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Institute for Disease Elimination in Abu Dhabi, and I'm really delighted to be here today, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this really important event. The event today is part of a week of programming leading up to World NTD Day. Some of you may know that earlier this week, the World Health Organization's Executive Board approved a decision to formally recognize the 30th of January as World NTD Day. This is a really important step to shine a light and a spotlight onto the suffering and tragedy of diseases that have been neglected for too long. And I know the UAE has been a proud supporter and a champion of this decision, along with many of its global partners. If you're watching on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question through the course of this event, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you're tweeting during this session, please use the hashtag #BeatNTDs. Let me quickly let you know what you've got in store for you. We're going to begin with a presentation and some words from the United Arab Emirates ambassador to the US. He's going to pass on to the chairman of the board of the Carter Center, Jason Carter. And then I have the privilege of sitting with Paige Alexander, the CEO of the Carter Center, to talk a bit about both our institutions' work, the challenge around NTDs, and what the future might look like. So with that, it is now my pleasure of introducing His Excellency Yusuf Al Otaiba, the Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the United States, a role he has held since 2008. Since his appointment, Ambassador Al Otaiba has made a very positive impact on the UAE-US relationships, strengthening bilateral security and economic cooperation and increasing cultural understanding between the two countries. And we just had a little private chat before this started, and just looking at the parallels between his grandfather and Jason's grandfather, it's just an inspiring story. So I can't wait to hear from you, Ambassador. The ambassador is no stranger to Washington, D.C., having studied, I think, international relations at Georgetown and stays affiliated with Georgetown University. He's no stranger either to philanthropic causes. And if I recall correctly, I don't think he's a stranger to championing the cause of disease elimination and eradication, and has lent support to polio eradication efforts. Prior to his current post, the ambassador served for 8 years as Director of International Affairs for the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, His Highness Sheikh Mohamed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. It is with great pleasure that I hand over to you, Ambassador Otaiba. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's great to be with you, and everyone, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be with you today to talk about something most people don't really pay attention to. I want to talk about the vast amount of work that the UAE and the Carter Center were working together on for a long period of time that largely goes unnoticed. I come from an area that's sometimes seen as difficult or challenging, so it's a real pleasure to talk about the things that we are doing on the positive side of the coin. This relationship between the UAE and the Carter Center has actually started 30 years ago between Sheikh Zayed and former President Carter personally. It started about 1990. Sheikh Zayed and President Carter, which was just reconfirmed with my brief conversation with Jason, I think are long lost brothers. They share the same spirit, they share the same values, and they both want to help other people. I think they both believe that if they are fortunate enough to be in a certain position, it is an absolute responsibility to be helping others, and to be helping others regardless of their faith, of their ethnicity, of their geography. Initially, they channeled this energy into the goal of eliminating Guinea worm, a debilitating disease that was largely forgotten, except in communities that it afflicted in Africa and Asia. And today, under the leadership of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, the UAE continued to support the fight against Guinea worm and other neglected tropical diseases. Partnerships like this one between the UAE and the Carter Center are critical to accelerating global health progress and helping solve some of the world's most pressing health issues. Global health and development are very much intertwined, and the spread of diseases like Guinea worm or river blindness are often made worse by poor socioeconomic conditions. In fact, now more than ever, partnerships with NGOs like the Carter Center and other governments are helping the world overcome the COVID pandemic. This pandemic, or any other pandemic, transcends borders or politics and really highlights the necessity of global cooperation. Only by coming together and putting these divisive issues behind us do we ever have a chance to overcome what we are going through right now. And that's exactly the spirit that I think we will continue to underscore in our partnership with the Carter Center and others. If I've learned anything over the past year, it is there are certain things that just force us to come together. There are certain issues like pandemics and climate change that are going to make us put politics in the back seat and focus on working together. It doesn't help us to address the COVID pandemic in one part of the world while it thrives in another part of the world. It means we really haven't solved it. And so I think what we're doing here with the Carter Center should be a teaching moment for how we need to come together to eradicate, whether it's guinea worm, COVID, or climate change. We all need to come together to resolve these problems because no one country, no matter how big or how powerful, can ever do it alone. And with that, I want to hand over now to Jason and hope that we can continue this project and this partnership and make it even stronger. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be with you this morning. As you mentioned, and as you said, we had a brief conversation beforehand, and it is a shame that all of us can't be together today, and that I'm from my basement here in Atlanta because of the COVID pandemic and this very rainy day. But it is a great honor to be here and a great honor to be with you. As you mentioned, the United Arab Emirates is one of the Carter Center's most valued partners, and it is our pleasure to celebrate this fourth decade of partnership to combat neglected tropical diseases. As you also mentioned, this relationship began long ago with the friendship between Sheikh Zayed and my grandfather, and they did share a lot of the same values about people and community. They both also understood, I believe, that the power of people who on the outside are in rural or poor communities have the ability to make great change in their lives. And I know that my grandfather came from a tiny village in rural Georgia with 600 people. And he recognized where other people in Mali or South Sudan might look at a tiny village and see a place to provide pity. They recognize that those communities have people with real power. And as I'll mention in a minute, the power of those communities to make a difference in the world is really the driving force behind the work that the Carter Center, the UAE, and the Al Nahyan family has done together. That original commitment to make the world a healthier place, as you also mentioned, has continued, not just from Sheikh Zayed, but through Sheikh Khalifa, and has grown even stronger now under the commitment by His Highness Sheikh Mohamed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince. And it has now a true multi-generational relationship between our families, between the UAE and the Carter Center. And as a demonstration of this commitment, I am honored and excited to announce a new chapter that through the Crown Prince Court, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed has pledged $10 million to assist the guinea worm eradication program in its effort to reach the very end of the disease. And through a challenge fund initiated by the Carter Center's Board of Trustees, which I chair, the first $4 million of that will be matched dollar for dollar. So it's a $14 million impact that's being made. And let me say this on behalf of my grandparents, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, and the entire guinea worm eradication program, we offer our sincere thanks. Now, let me tell you how important this gift is. The commitment to eradicating guinea worm disease is deeply personal for my grandparents. They first heard about this disease in the 1980s when they discovered, in essence, this disease. It was not only neglected as a tropical disease, it was essentially unknown outside of the places where it was affecting people. And this was in the poorest, most marginalized places in the world. But what was remarkable about this particular disease is that you were able to eliminate it and then eradicate it with a few simple strategies that could be carried out by people in their own communities to change the way they collected water, to provide some simple treatment to their water sources. And with a little bit of political will and investment, the disease could be eliminated. And knowing that all it took was outreach, was understanding, was education to prevent this disease from happening, it was almost an uncontrollable urge to eliminate it. And so once we decided to tackle this program, this disease, there was no doubt that we had to finish it. Now, I'm excited to share some positive news. When we began, this disease affected millions, literally millions of people. But this year, in 2020, we have just a handful of cases left. There was a 50% reduction from the tiny number in 2019 and a 20% reduction in animal infections. And despite the COVID pandemic, the program to eradicate this disease has been operating at a 95% capacity. So we have the ability, we've come to that last mile, but one of the things that we have learned and that we understand, and that this gift from the Crown Prince's court that is so important, is this last mile is crucially important. And as we have approached this disease, we know not only that we will eradicate this disease, but that we will provide lessons for so many others who are in the business of ridding the world of human diseases. Now, of course, we share these accomplishments with our partners and appreciate them enormously. As I mentioned before, these diseases that we talk about today, neglected tropical diseases, many of them are not just neglected, but unknown. And they impact populations that are the most remote and the poorest communities in the world. And we now see that there are others in the NGO community, governments and donor communities are aware of these problems, but working to address them. We are thrilled that this week, and that the World Health Organization is leading up this week to the the Neglected Tropical Disease Day. And we've shown through all of this work on a variety of diseases, including this great partnership, that a global, local partnership can work and that these diseases can be successfully eliminated. So we congratulate Sheikh Mohamed on his many initiatives to combat disease, including creating the Reaching the Last Mile Fund, founding GLIDE, the Global Institute for Disease Elimination, the work of the Crown Prince Court, and his personal philanthropy. My grandparents have spent a great deal of time in the UAE over the years. As you mentioned, they cite it as one of their favorite places to visit. When I became chair of the Carter Center's Board of Trustees, one of my very first trips was to the UAE to say thank you to our partners. And I am excited once we get the ability to travel again, to come back and pay another visit. With this latest gift, the Carter Center, the United Arab Emirates will continue the work to eradicate guinea worm disease, to make the world a healthier, more peaceful place, to demonstrate that it can be done, and to provide, we hope, an example for the rest of the world. So before I leave you with that word of thanks and that request for another invitation to the UAE, I would like to introduce Paige Alexander, who is the new CEO of the Carter Center, who will join our friend Simon Bland, whom you've already met, of GLIDE, to discuss the details of neglected tropical disease efforts.
So we're both relative newcomers, I think, to this world in one way or another. I think you're about 6 months into your role there at the Carter Center. So it'd be great to just start off by hearing a little bit from you, telling us a little bit more about the Carter Center itself, its work, and what drew you to this organization.
Sure, thanks, Simon. It's wonderful to be here with you all. I came to the Carter Center after a long career in international development, but mainly on the donor side through the US AID and through government channels as well as private foundations. But I was very anxious to get back to the real implementing of the work. And so the Carter Center really, in my mind's eye, sort of brings together so much. President and Mrs. Carter, when the founders started, they had a North Star of global health and peace. And they have stuck to that for 38 years. And so the fact that we've been able, as Jason was just talking about, what they saw in Plains, Georgia was what President Carter saw when he traveled the world. And the need to reach the people at the end of the road, the most vulnerable, that to me is a calling. And I feel very fortunate to be part of that. At the end of the day, it's the power of these partnerships, both on the ground with the people there. We've got 2,800 staff throughout a number, throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and they're all local. We're not jetting our folks in, we're providing technical assistance, but at the end of the day, it's the behavior change and what we can bring to these countries to help them out. But it's the power of these partnerships, both locally on the ground and empower the partnerships that we have, for example, with the UAE. The work we do in both peace and health really focuses on the common interests that are shared across all of humanity. And so we couldn't succeed without the partnerships. We've got Fortune 500 companies, we've got governments around the world that provide funding and materials and donate medicine. And without these partnerships, without the individuals that we have, the family foundations, and many like the UAE have been with us for several decades, and they're just as invested in guinea worm as President and Mrs. Carter are. So the trust that the donors put in us, the trust that the people we work with, all of that is really a calling that says that the Carter Center is working on the ground to help the people that are most vulnerable. So I should throw the same question out to you, Simon. I mean, the Global Institute for Disease Elimination, or GLIDE, is a new organization, and you're the first CEO. And the current partnership between our two organizations is also very recent and really exciting. So what drew you to GLIDE?
So thanks, Paige. And there are a lot of similarities there. And just hearing you and Jason and the president's word about the power of people and the power of communities. I spent sort of 35 years with the British government working entirely overseas in Africa, Asia, Pacific. Nothing comes quite close to that direct engagement at the at the front line in the communities and in the homes. And there are a couple of sayings that struck me. One is the desire to don't just stand there, do something, but the other is don't just do something, stand there, which is learn, listen, understand. And I think you talked about sort of empowering and helping and providing assistance, but the work is at the community and by communities. So when this notion came up of moving to Abu Dhabi to help establish this new institute, the chairman, Walid Al-Makhrab, called me and had a conversation and said, you might think it's a little bit odd starting an institute in Abu Dhabi. And actually, I didn't see it as odd. And we talked it through a little bit. And clearly, there's a geographic element to this. It's at the heart of 3 continents. It's got incredible infrastructure, great flights when people are connected in the world. It has this culture of philanthropy coming from humble beginnings and understanding the needs and desires of people to change their own lives, and a policy commitment, and it has ambition. And we launched GLIDE in the Louvre in Abu Dhabi at the end of 2019, and it is this awe-inspiring building on an island that didn't exist 7 years ago. I mean, you want to talk about ambition, and so when you put your mind to it, with the commitment and the resources and that ambition, you can really move mountains. And so that really attracted me there. And speaking to a good friend of mine, Peter Piot at the London School, he said, this is a great idea. This is globalizing global health. And I think what we're trying to do is diversify and globalize global health, but also localize it. And so that putting communities at the center is really important for this. And I think the final thing that really attracted me to this was, elimination is pretty inspiring. It's really difficult, and your 30-year partnership with the UAE that's almost got to this final handful of guinea worm disease sufferers is a great illustration of the progress you can make. But that last mile, that last bit is really hard, and it would be too easy to turn one's back on this. And so finishing the job is so important. And I'm inspired. I was in Togo just before lockdown. Togo has eliminated lymphatic filariasis. When they celebrated that, yes, the Minister of Health came, the Minister of Planning came, the Minister of Economy came, and several other ministers came to celebrate a really tangible victory. And so I think just the notion that it is doable is really inspiring. And when one thinks that Malawi has also done it, and Yemen, of all countries, has eliminated lymphatic filariasis, it's hugely interesting. So for GLIDE, a new institution, looking at this, we've got a lot to learn. Partnerships is super important for us. and I hope we can structure ourselves and work in ways that we help other partners go faster and further towards disease elimination. So it's early days. I think we're making progress, but since our launch in November 29, the world has changed a little bit, right? Uh, so COVID's been difficult for everybody. It's been tragically difficult for far too many people. So how has this really impacted your work at the Carter Center? And what's your experience of getting, to know a new job in a new global organization when you work from home? I think I heard you before this meeting started saying you've got two colleagues in the room that you've met for the first time today. So it would be really great to hear a little bit of your experiences of the challenges around this world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, I think, and as the ambassador had referred to this, this is a very different world. I moved here in the middle of the global pandemic. I was coming from Europe, where we had flattened the curve momentarily in June, and it was to arrive here in Atlanta, Georgia, in the midst of a global pandemic with rising numbers, to take over an organization that did international development work, yet we couldn't get to the field. Was very challenging. But at the same time, where you have these challenges, you have these opportunities. And that's been very exciting. We've been able to do some pivots. I mean, with, fortunately for guinea worm, as I said, with our staff being local, 95% of our work continued because people were able to get around. It's discussing behavior change. It's discussing the way to collect water, as Jason was saying. These things did not change in many of those places, but the mass drug administrations, the MDAs, really, we did have to scale back. And so, we've continued, but we felt the impact. And, for us, we were able to move into, working with ministries of health. We were able to provide radio broadcasts and messages about soap and personal protective equipment and hygiene to make sure that our messaging on the work that we were doing was integrated with the COVID messaging. So people had a better understanding. And this goes for mental health too. We've, I think all of us, even though I'm fortunate enough to be in my office today, you haven't been able to get back to your office. And some of the folks I work with, my colleagues, I've not met them in person. I've met them in a very non-3D fashion. And so it's hard to really understand the impact we have on the ground, which is why I hope we're able to show the video, because part of that for me is seeing really the people that we're helping and listening to them tell their story, because a lot of the work that we're doing really does come in a feedback loop to hear what is culturally appropriate, how we can be helpful to people on the ground. So we're not just coming in with our own ideas, but we're listening to what works. And that's been a big part of the way the Carter Center works, is having these conversations. So as I said, where there are challenges, there are opportunities. And I'm fortunate enough to work with an amazing staff who are finding those opportunities during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was speaking with Jason before, and as you mentioned, I did the longest business trip of my life. I flew off to Namibia from Abu Dhabi. Lockdown happened. I went back to my home then in Connecticut, USA, and it was not until sort of November that I got back to Abu Dhabi and said it was the longest business trip of my life. I fly back to the Emirates tomorrow. I'm speaking. I think Jason said he was speaking from his basement. I'm speaking from my attic here in the UK. But we'll get back tomorrow. But it's been a challenge, I think, for many of us. We've recruited a team virtually. The team has not met one another. We're geographically dispersed. We've found ways of coming together, but it's a little bit more difficult than I think the situation before. We've equally had to find ways of working that as a startup, without this sort of network and history and legacy of partnerships on the ground, it's been a little bit challenging. And so we've found a few entry points really on the recommendations of partners, but it almost demands a slight leap of faith and a little bit more trust and a little bit more risk taking to program and work when you haven't set foot in the country and you haven't worked directly with the partners. But we're doing that, and we rely very heavily on partners to do that. COVID for us, the board thought long and hard early on about whether, because we were so new and because COVID is really a sort of generationally defining health crisis that none of us have seen before. I think a lot of organizations have had this conversation. Do we pivot to COVID? And we decided not to pivot to COVID, and we decided not to take on COVID, but we did need to take account of it, as we all have. we're doing a little bit of work of advocacy around COVAX and you know, the sort of the equitable distribution of vaccines, and why that's not only morally the right thing to do, but also in our self-interest. And so this notion of suffering, this notion of people being left behind, this notion of the history that you have at the center of dealing with those who have been neglected. The people are neglected, not just the diseases, it's the people. And if we don't address those issues, then we don't get our way out of COVID. And so I think there's a lot of synergies. There's plenty of disruption that we've seen from COVID, but also some real opportunities around the infrastructure and the assets, I guess, of NTD programming, community health workers, community drug distributors, you know, surveillance programs, the knowledge of how to deal with, you know, with infectious diseases, the trust that is built up in communities. So I think there are some real opportunities there, but we all struggle with some of the disruptions that we've seen. So I think COVID is, you know, is with us. It was interesting to watch Raj Kumar and Ellen Agler a couple of days ago on their, you know, conversations around NTDs and you know, and COVID. I think the deepest fear is that we lose years, if not decades, of progress. And I think that's a challenge for all of us. We've worked very hard at risk mitigation, but we're not through the, you know, the woods yet. Let me just, before I come back to you, just say a couple of things of why we're so delighted to be on this call and working with you. I was very fortunate to visit the center in December 2019. Met with Curtis and many other staff there, gave them a little bit of a sort of backstory of Glide. They know the Emirates very well, of course, and they were very gracious. And we thought about a number of things that we might do together. And it's great to see our partnership now with you on river blindness in the Americas, on the border of Venezuela and Brazil, and our work on helping your program support the elimination of lymphatic filariasis and malaria in Hispaniola. Two pieces of work which would be monumental. I mean, you know, the eradication of, or the elimination of river blindness from the Americas. I mean, you know, what a milestone. We very much hope that we help you on the course to that, but also, you know, a malaria-free Caribbean and a region with, you know, a shrinking footprint of lymphatic filariasis, things that we're really pleased to do. And I told you this anecdote, and I am going to say it. As we're a new organization, we need to work with partners. We have to learn with partners. But a senior member of our technical advisory committee said to me, if you're going to have a partnership with anybody to start with, the Carter Center is a really good one to begin with. So we're really, really pleased to be part of this event. We're really pleased to be working with you and learning from you. It's not going to be easy. There are challenges ahead. But I hope this is the beginning of a great relationship that builds on that legacy of relationships between your center and the Emirates. I mean, I think it would be great, Paige, to get a little bit of a sense from you now on sort of how do you see the future? I mean, when President Carter and Mrs. Carter started working in this area, there wasn't a phrase to, you know, to describe what we were talking about. And Jason said it's not only neglected, there are unknown diseases. And these diseases are still unknown by the vast majority of you know, of the world. So, you know, how do you see the future? What gives you hope, and what makes you worry and stay awake at night and lose sleep? How do you see things shaping up over the sort of short to medium term?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question, because really what keeps me up at night is also the same thing that keeps me going. As you know, Jason said, and as President Carter has said, you know, there are no neglected diseases, there are neglected people. And so to the extent that we can reach that last mile, to the extent that we are talking to the people that we work with, you know, we've seen over the past 35 years, we've seen a 99.99% reduction in cases of guinea worm disease. And we've gone from approximately 3.5 million cases in 21 countries in 1986 down to only 27 human cases last year. And with the help of Glide and many other partners, we've seen river blindness in the Americas decrease from hundreds of thousands of people at risk over the 6 countries to a pocket of less than 35,000 people deep in the Brazil, Venezuela, Amazon border region. Now, you can't reach these people by techniques that we as practitioners have used over the last 50 years. We have to be innovative. We have to think about how we get to this last mile. And the last mile of the journeys always continue to be the most difficult. As you were saying, to get to that last guinea worm is going to be very tough. And, with the international NGO community, we need to fight these diseases together so they don't reemerge. And we need to make sure that COVID doesn't set us back as far as we worry about the effects of, as we've seen with COVID, there's not a lot of difference between the developing world and the developed world. When you have a global pandemic, it's going to hit everybody. And we've been very fortunate that our programs have continued, but we are going to be in this system for quite some time. And so how do we run parallel tracks of making sure through COVAX, as you mentioned, which I'm pleased the US is again part of, how do we make sure that these tracks can run in parallel so we don't lose any momentum we have on either side? So, the challenges that we need to overcome are both global and local. And that's why partnerships like we have with GLIDE, like we have with the UAE, will continue to be really important, because we know we can't do this alone. President Carter never thought we could do it alone. And so bringing people on board with us is a huge part of making a difference.
I was reminded, well, first of all, I wrote something yesterday that used the expression, I think the USA's commitment to COVAX is a shot in the arm for COVAX. I think it's, as a shot in the arm for shots in the arm for everybody, which is hugely important. As we think about, sort of neglected diseases, and we think about actually some of the remarkable things around the COVID response. The number of diagnostics, the development of therapies, this record-breaking pace for vaccine development of, I think we, sort of 4, 5, 6 vaccines in emergency use pre-authorization, is unprecedented. So I guess the hope is that sort of innovations that we've seen over the last year can be inspiring for other innovations we need. For example, more diagnostics developed over the last 9 months for COVID than for all 20 entities over the last 100 years. And one gets it and one understands it. It's a global crisis. It affects everybody. Not everybody sort of goes to sleep at night worried about, sort of contracting lymphatic filariasis, but nevertheless, it shows what can be done. And so sort of figuring out ways in which we end this neglect, if so many people are not yet aware. I mean, what sort of things can we do? The worry, I guess, that I have is that we have these great conversations with people who have compassion and care, they have skills, but it's still a bit of an echo chamber. And how might we break out of this echo chamber? Is this focus on global health right now and the conversation, might that be an opportunity? And what do you think? I'm not sure. What do you think?
I agree with you, because I think that this has been the great equalizer. Everybody is stuck at home, but when you're stuck at home, you have different ability. Either you're connected, you have a computer, you have things that allow you to function, or you're stuck at home in cases that we work on mental health, for example, or domestic violence. You're stuck at home in a situation that's not so healthy. And so as we look across the board at what this means and how we carry forward, how we become more sensitized to safe drinking water, to the effects of climate, and making sure that people are being cognizant of how they throw their trash away. These aren't really our areas, but global health actually is this umbrella that is causing people to look at how they lead their life differently. And for us, for the US, getting involved in COVAX, for the voices that are speaking in the US about the importance of getting a vaccine, because of course there's the anti-vaccine movement. All of these issues are a chance for us to communicate the importance of global health. And so from our perspective, whether we're talking lymphatic filariasis or guinea worm or river blindness, the fact that people are talking about health is different. I think people were too busy going about their daily lives before to understand the impact that health could have. And I think that, again, this truly causes us to be interconnected, because what impacts one of us does impact all of us. And I think that those are the repercussions of what we're going through right now. And so I think it's important for us to be on the ground talking to people about it. It's important for us to be communicating. I'm sorry the video is not available, but you can go to the Carter Center website and you can see all of our videos on neglected tropical diseases. And even though we can't travel there right now to be with the people on the ground, you and well, at least I can say I get a much better sense of the programs and the impact these programs are having on people because we're able to communicate it that way. So I do recommend everyone go and look at some of these videos because you'll see how this changes people's lives.
I think it's a really great point. I mean, just remind people, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function to ask them. I mean, this notion that we are interconnected. So someone falls ill in Wuhan and not too distant in the future, people are sick elsewhere. This has brought it home more than anything else ever has. I mean, Ebola did a little, one or two others have, but this is a moment where the world has seen this. If we can make the case compellingly that, for example, by having the infrastructure, the community health workers systems to deal with neglected diseases, community by community, 1.7 billion people at risk of NTDs. If you have a system that helps address that challenge, but that system also is a surveillance function that can track outbreaks and pandemics, then we're all safer. And I think this is the case we've really got to, this isn't philanthropy and just morally the right thing to do. It's totally in the world's self-interest, and it's not actually expensive. And so I think we have an opportunity. It's not a slam dunk done deal, but I do think there are real opportunities there. And the more we can provide this compelling argument that, I hate to use the word integration, but thinks about not just individual diseases, but the people and the system. And so we find economies of scale and ways of working that don't deal with single issues but deal with multiple issues. I think we have some real opportunities for for making that case. But there are challenges because economies have shrunk. There's less money to go around. There's been a heavy reliance on in ways for international public development assistance, and we're not suddenly going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the end of COVID, and now there's a lot of money awash for health. We've got some real challenging cases to make, but I still believe that the elimination argument and the success there is a real inspiration for others.
I think it's a theory of proof, a proof of theory. If we can get there. I mean, when we end guinea worm, it will only be the second disease ever eradicated, yeah. And it is a hugely important sort of theory that this can be done. And so the importance of taking it step by step, and the importance of working with partners that that have a long-standing relationship. I mean, our health programs have long focused on the community volunteers and empowering them for the work and the action, but we can't do this alone. So being able to have that connection with other partners that are in this, you've been in the global health field for quite some time. And so you see what's possible, but when we can prove that something actually works, it really helps buoy us to the next level.
And it's easy to forget when you think about the millions of cases to 27 cases. I mean, it is truly astonishing. I mean, truly astonishing. And when one thinks back to what polio did and what polio looked like, and we're not there yet, but you think it's a little bit easy to forget, and there's a generational thing there. When we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, people always ask me, what can we do? And I would always say, make them famous, make them personal, and get invested. And by making famous, I hope everybody, certainly listening to our conversation here, will go to worldntdday.org, look at the social media toolkits and get messages out. Make this famous. That the fact that we have a World NTD Day and that recognition is super important. We need to build on that. It's a little bit harder with NTDs to make them personal, but just imagine, just watch some of your amazing videos at the Carter Center and others, and imagine life 20 years ago, imagine life now, and imagine what's possible. And then find ways of getting invested, be it just time, be it telling your families, your spheres of influence. But if we get people thinking in that way, I think we can make, some huge strides. It's a really interesting and important year for NTDs. We've got the new roadmap from the World Health Organization, which is, I have a tattered sort of early draft here that is a bit of my Bible right now. But it's fantastic in terms of laying out the sorts of things that need to happen between now and 2030. We have the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in June that I think will co-convene malaria and NTD communities to think about implementing this roadmap in a more collective and joined up way. We hope that in the UAE Expo, we hope Expo will happen in October. We hope to welcome you all there, where we can talk about these issues, celebrate the successes, see the challenges going forward. But this is going to take a movement, and not an exclusive movement, I guess, just for NTDs, but an exclusive movement that says if we don't take global health seriously, this won't be the last pandemic. And it may not be the worst pandemic, but if we really thoughtfully invest now in global health, including the elimination and eradication of those NTDs that we can, then we stand a real prospect for success. So Paige, the questions just come up here. I think this one might be for you. In what do you think is the greatest challenge to eradicating guinea worm?
That's a good question. I think we've seen over time that guinea worm can jump to baboons and dogs. And so as we're so focused on the human element of it, the question is what happens if dogs get it, if baboons get it? And so I think, not to use the buzzwords, but I think that the Carter Center has been incredibly innovative in making sure that we come up with programs that work with the same guinea worm ambassadors we have on the ground to figure out how to tether dogs, how to make sure that we're setting up a system where the dogs aren't increasing the spread of it, or baboons. And so, putting abate on ponds to make sure that we're getting rid of the parasite and there's so many different new elements. And so I think we have to innovate over time to make sure that once we get to that last worm in a human, it truly is the last worm. And so I think that that's one of the bigger challenges we have. But at the same time, I think we're up to the challenge because, I keep my guinea worm here. I've got a guinea worm right here. So, it reminds me on a daily basis that we need to the demise of the worm, we need to get to that last worm, and we'll do it however we can.
So if it was easy, we wouldn't do it. It's and that sort of species jumping in reservoirs and being ready to learn and to innovate has got to be a feature of all elimination and eradication efforts. I know we're seeing it right now with polio. There's going to have to be some new strategies, to figure out some of these final challenges. Another question's just come in for us, Paige. Let me read this one out. There was a panel yesterday on the role of frontline workers in this fight, which is clearly critical. How has the Carter Center approached the role, and how has it changed in the organization's 30+ year history? So this importance of community health frontline workers.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm 6 months into the job, and so I'll tell you what has most impressed me is the fact that the people that I work with here that are running the program also are in the field. They saw firsthand. We're not hiring technical, advisors who've been stuck in a library studying something or stuck in a lab. They've actually been in the field. They've seen how our interventions can work effectively. And so for me, that's that feedback loop I'm talking about. That's what is, once they've met someone who has guinea worm, making sure they understand how not to get it again, making sure the community understands how difficult this is for people's livelihoods, whether it's their economic well-being, whether it's the ability to work, in the fields, or to be a functioning member of their family when they're suffering from this, hideous problem, and painful, incredibly painful. And so making sure that we know how to address this by not just behavior change, and not just drinking through a straw, or collecting water in a way that they've done differently, that we're asking them to do differently than they've done for generations. It's how do we then have them communicate to the people in their villages and the people in their community. And I think that that is one of the things that we have learned over time, is where our interventions are useful and where we need to listen to the community to make sure that they are speaking to culturally to their own village, whether it's the village elders or the kids, as to how to make sure that we move beyond this point. So I think that that's part of the innovation that we've had.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. And that just never underestimating the value and power of community trust. When those workers, sort of the community, in the community, sort of gain that trust, it's remarkable the things they can do. For example, in responding to a pandemic, the importance of hand washing, the importance of other measures, the importance of getting a vaccine when a vaccine sort of rolls out. And so it's it builds this collateral and capability to challenge existing challenges, but also future challenges, which is hugely important. I think the other thing that I've just seen that in my time that is really transforming the value and power of community health workers is some of the innovations around digital technology, and the ability to have sort of intuitive design, handhelds, real-time data surveillance, algorithmic diagnostic work, a whole set of things that further enable and empower that front line to be sort of more powerful and more effective, which is exciting. We have another audience question which we tried to answer a little bit, but I think it's a question that does bear repeating. Given so many people are unaware of neglected tropical diseases and of them even existing, what is needed for more general public to become aware? So again, I would just reiterate, please, for the audience, go to worldntdday.org, take a look at the tools there, talk to your friends, to your family, to your colleagues, to anyone who will listen and some that won't, and help make the case. Show, if anyone watches a video of guinea worm disease and doesn't think this is outrageous that this still exists, that we haven't got to the end of this despite all the efforts, we're getting there. But we want to do this by next year. We don't want to wait 20 years. And I know we've got to temper ambition with realism, but you can't see some of this suffering and not be moved. And you can't see some of this suffering and know that there are tools and remedies, dirt cheap tools and remedies. And you can't do that without having a sense of some sort of moral outrage. Well, moral outrage is good, but it's not enough. But if we can translate that into attention and awareness and action, and if we're good enough at translating that action into results, then I am hopeful. It goes back to that earlier question. Yeah, I have days where I'm a little bit cynical, too old maybe, but equally, and that's because I haven't been to the front line for more than a year. That's why. But
watch videos. It really makes you
well, and we have to, and the more we ask communities to make videos and tell their own stories, and the world has shrunk so much that it allows us to do that. But I don't know. It's just shout and try and find ways of taking action. I don't know if you have other ideas, Paige, that sort of turns that neglect into a sort of much greater appreciation of awareness beyond our usual communities.
Yeah, well, I think, as you said, what this global pandemic has done is to sort of make people around the world aware of global health and of the needs. And so, as you were saying, as President Carter says in his video, I couldn't pronounce most of the the diseases that we work on. And so that makes it very difficult. I mean, as a kid, you might have heard about elephantitis or lymphatic filariasis, but you didn't really know that affected people. Once you realize how little it takes to make sure that this effect does not happen, whether, for trachoma, these are diseases that can be solved. So something's happening on this. Okay, these are diseases that can be solved. And as I said, if when we get to eradicating the last form, that will be only the second disease eradicated, and without any drugs. And that's another important fact, that these neglected tropical diseases, they don't always require pharmaceuticals. I mean, that is something that our partnership is very important, but a lot of it is behavior change. And so I think that that is a very important piece of people understanding that some of this, and again, just with the pandemic, wash your hands, wear a mask, keep your distance. Like, these are things that really will change the course of the disease. And the same goes in the field. And so having that understanding that people are actually in control, it should be a slightly more empowering aspect. And I try to look at the glass as half full in that respect. If we can empower people to take this on as their responsibility, it does change the course of the disease, regardless what disease you have. It changes the course because they understand that it's within their control to either help and get the vaccine, get the pharmaceuticals, work with NGOs, or just the behavior change of how to collect water. These are things that really are within people's controls if they're just given the knowledge. And so I think it's a really important impact that donors and that NGOs have to make sure that people have the knowledge to affect change in their own lives.
Paige, thanks. I was just going to wrap up, but one other question's just come in quickly. I think it builds on what you just said. I mean, it is remarkable, as you say. We have the success of smallpox, and it's a huge success. We have the success of rinderpest in animal husbandry. We have come and are coming close in guinea worm and polio. Polio is very much dependent on on vaccine behavior change, of course, and vaccine. It is a really interesting point, the guinea worm, without any sort of pharmaceutical intervention. It is behavior change. It is understanding and awareness on that behavior. It's a remarkable story, I think. Just one final question, and then I think we should wrap up because we'll have gotten to the hour. But should we not make a greater effort to publicize our great successes in NTDs? I mean, yes, we should, and we will. But and you guys are terrific at this. I mean, we have a lot to learn from you. But I think, I mean, my hope is that things like World NTD Day, things like the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, big events that give us the opportunity to showcase this to audiences that wouldn't typically see this, is important. But this will demand all of us, sort of acting, together in ways to try and find those audiences.
Yeah, and I would say, as you see buildings light up around the world, from Plains, Georgia, and Atlanta, Georgia, to UAE light up green on Saturday in celebration of World NTD Day. People, if you take a picture of it, you say, why is this building green? You take a picture and you post it on social media. It's really going to bring attention to this issue. And I think that that's part of it. Again, empowering people around the world to understand that NTDs are out there, that they can be solved, that there is attention being given to them. That's an important element. So I would encourage anyone, if you see a green building lit up, or if you start seeing that fly through social media on Saturday, to retweet it, to post it on your own social media so people become aware. I mean, it is amazing. I was watching a show with one of my kids, during lockdown, and they mentioned guinea worm. And I thought, this was just a kids' TV show, and they mentioned guinea worm. And I thought, this is a teachable moment. Wow. And so it's those type of activities that allow us to all get involved in neglected tropical diseases. And so I think it's important that we raise the voice where we can, and we'll continue to do it. And Simon, your work and our partnership together is going to be part of that. And so thank you very much for all you're doing.
Great. So, well, Paige, I want to say thank you. It's been such a great pleasure to spend a bit of time with you and the Carter Center and Jason and the ambassador. I want to thank you. I want to thank the Carter Center. I want to thank the United Arab Emirates, the Crown Prince Court of Abu Dhabi, as well as Ambassador Al Otaiba and Jason for participating in this. Again, invite all viewers to visit the Carter Center website, the GLIDE website. Go to worldntdday.org. Tweet #BeatNTDs, get involved on World NTD Day, and as Paige says, retweet and make a noise.
Look for the orange.
Look for
Yes,
the
I
orange.
said green, but look for the orange. I'm looking at Zoom green.
I'm told the video may well play, so I'm just going to, with that, say thank you to you again, Paige. Thank you to everybody else for watching. And if the video doesn't play, then go to the Carter Center website and you'll see it there. Paige, once again, it's been a great privilege and a pleasure. And thank you everybody for watching and joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Thank you.
And I was so overwhelmed with concern for the people that suffered from that disease that we decided to take it on at the Carter Center. And that's how we became involved in neglected diseases. Dracunculiasis, onchocerciasis, lymphatic filariasis, schistosomiasis, and trachoma.
We were the poorest, most isolated people in the world. Often, if we weren't there, there would be nobody to help them.
I try to alleviate their suffering by giving them the same kind of treatment that has eradicated or eliminated these diseases in the rich countries on earth.